The 11th of June, 1999. An 86-year-old woman dies peacefully in Lakewood, California. When they prepare her body for burial, they notice something extraordinary. She's still wearing her wedding ring. The ring her husband placed on her finger 55 years earlier. The husband she'd been married to for exactly 7 months before he died on a beach in the Pacific, killed by mortar fire whilst leading Marines through a minefield on Iwo Jima. Lena Mae Basilone never remarried, never dated, never removed the ring. That's just one story from the Pacific. The real story, the one the series couldn't tell you. The HBO series followed 3 Marines through hell: John Basilone, Eugene Sledge, and Robert Leckie. 10 episodes of combat. But what the series couldn't show you, what those brief epilogue cards could never convey, were the decades that followed. The nightmares that lasted 55 years. The marriages that somehow survived. The men who vanished into the wilderness for 35 years. The ones who became doctors, professors, writers. The ones who spent the rest of their lives trying to outrun what they'd seen. Here's what you're about to discover. First, you'll hear about the man who became a legend twice, the only Marine to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross in World War II, and how he died before 10:30 in the morning on Iwo Jima. Then you'll learn about the professor haunted by nightmares for 55 years, the writer who walked out of a Broadway musical to tell the truth, and the killer who went silent for 35 years. And finally, you'll understand what it actually cost to survive the Pacific. Not just the men who died in combat, but the ones who spent decades trying to make sense of what they'd endured. These aren't the sanitized stories from the end credits. This is what really happened to the Marines of the Pacific. John Basilone was born in Buffalo, New York, on the 4th of November 1916, the 6th of 10 children in an Italian immigrant family. Before the Marines, he'd served 3 years in the Army in the Philippines, earning the nickname Manila John for the stories he told about the islands. But it was Guadalcanal that made him immortal. October 1942. The Japanese launched a massive assault on Henderson Field. Basilone commanded 2 machine gun sections. When one section was wiped out, he moved an extra gun into position, repaired another under continuous fire, then personally manned it. When ammunition ran critically low and supply lines were cut, he fought his way through hostile lines to bring shells back to his gunners. The citation for his Medal of Honor doesn't fully capture it. Basilone held that line for 3 days straight. No sleep, no rest. Just him and his machine guns. They sent him home to sell war bonds. Parades. Photo opportunities with mayors. 50,000 people turned out in Raritan, New Jersey, to honor him. But Basilone hated it. He felt like a museum piece. Twice he requested to return to combat. Twice they refused. The Marine Corps didn't want to lose their poster boy. Then he met Lena at Camp Pendleton. She was training Marines as a sergeant in the Women's Reserve. He was training them for the invasion he desperately wanted to join. They married on the 10th of July, 1944, at St. Mary's Star of the Sea Church in Oceanside, California. Honeymooned at an onion farm in Oregon. Hardly romantic, but they were happy. By December, Basilone had finally worn them down. They let him return to the Pacific, assigned to C Company, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines for the invasion of Iwo Jima. The morning of the 19th of February, 1945, Basilone landed on Red Beach 2. His unit was pinned down immediately by Japanese fire from fortified blockhouses connected by tunnels 35 feet underground. Basilone maneuvered himself on top of a Japanese blockhouse and destroyed it with grenades. Then he guided a disabled American tank through a minefield under intense mortar and artillery fire. He got the tank to safety. Then the mortar shell hit him. Small arms fire to the groin and neck, shrapnel that nearly took his left arm. It wasn't even 10:30 in the morning. Chuck Tatum, who witnessed his death, later recalled, "If John Basilone could get killed, we all wondered what was going to happen to the rest of us." You've just heard about a legend who died at dawn. But that's only the beginning. If you're the sort of person who wants to hear the real stories, not the Hollywood version, not the sanitized epilogue, but what actually happened to these men after the cameras stopped rolling, then you're exactly who we make these videos for. Every week, we dig into the archives, track down family members, and uncover what really occurred when the war ended and the heroism faded. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let me tell you about the man who couldn't escape the war, even when he tried. Eugene Sledge returned to Mobile, Alabama, in 1946. He'd survived Peleliu and Okinawa, two of the most brutal battles in Marine Corps history. The series shows him struggling to readjust, staring at a rainstorm, unable to enjoy hunting with his father. What the series doesn't fully convey is just how damaged he was. His father, a physician who'd treated World War I veterans, had warned him before he enlisted. Even if you don't get physically scarred, you might be scarred emotionally beyond repair. His father was right. Sledge attended Auburn University on the GI Bill. His fellow students had no idea the quiet biology student had nightmares every night. Dreams of Japanese soldiers, of rain, of mud, of bodies rotting in the heat. The nightmares continued through his master's degree in 1955. Through his doctorate in biology from the University of Florida in 1960. Through his 28 years teaching at the University of Montevallo. His students adored him. They had no idea their gentle professor woke screaming in the night. For things kept the nightmares at bay: classical music, especially Mozart; literature, particularly 20th century English poetry; scientific research; and the close observation of nature. Birds, animals, the natural world his father had taught him to love. But mostly it was writing. You know what's remarkable? Most people watch The Pacific, see the end credits and move on. But you're still here. Which tells me you're someone who actually cares about honoring these men properly. Not just as characters, but as human beings. That's exactly why this channel exists. We're building a community that refuses to let these stories fade away. If that sounds like something you want to be part of, subscribe. Now, back to Eugene Sledge and the book that helped him survive. At his wife Jean's urging, Sledge finally put his experiences on paper. In 1981, he published with the Old Breed, at Peleliu and Okinawa. The title referred to the professional old-school Marines he'd served with. Men he deeply respected. The book is unflinching. Sledge doesn't sanitize the horror. He describes the heat, the mud, the stench of decomposing bodies, the casual cruelty, the gold teeth pulled from corpses, the terror of artillery, the moments when he nearly lost his humanity. Writing the book helped. Not completely. The nightmares never fully stopped, but it gave him a way to process what he'd endured. The book became a classic, used by the Marine Corps, taught in military academies. Eugene Sledge died on the 3rd of March 2001, after a long battle with stomach cancer. He was 77 years old. His wife Jean, whom he'd married in 1952, and their two sons John and Henry survived him. He's buried at Pinecrest Cemetery in Mobile. The same year Sledge died, another Marine passed away, one whose story was intertwined with his. Robert Leckie was born in Philadelphia in 1920, the youngest of 8 children in an Irish Catholic family. By age 16, he was already writing sports journalism for the Bergen Evening Record. The day after Pearl Harbor, he enlisted in the Marines. The series captures Leckie's intelligence, his cynicism, his contempt for incompetent officers, his tendency to end up in the brig. What it shows less of is his fierce integrity as a writer. Leckie served as a machine gunner and scout with H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. He fought at Guadalcanal, Cape Gloucester, and was evacuated from Peleliu after suffering a blast concussion when he was caught in an ammunition supply explosion. He never returned to combat. Discharged in March 1945, Leckie returned to New Jersey and married Vera Keller, his lifelong neighbor whom he'd barely known before the war. They had 3 children, David, Jeff, and Joan. In 1951, Leckie and Vera attended a performance of South Pacific on Broadway. Halfway through, Leckie walked out. Vera asked why. He said, "I have to tell the story of how it really was. I have to let people know the war wasn't a musical." 6 years later, in 1957, he published Helmet for My Pillow, a brutally honest memoir that didn't shy away from the terror, the boredom, the casual brutality, the mistakes, the fear. Publishers had rejected it repeatedly. They wanted dramatized war novels with sex and action. Leckie gave them the truth. The book sold well, but more importantly, it told the truth. Leckie went on to write more than 40 books on American military history, spanning from the French and Indian War to Desert Storm. But the war stayed with him. In the final decades of his life, Leckie battled Alzheimer's disease, a long, slow erasure of the mind that had captured the Pacific War so vividly. Robert Leckie died on Christmas Eve, 2001, 6 days after his 81st birthday. He was survived by Vera, his wife of 55 years, his 3 children, 2 sisters, and 6 grandchildren. His remains were entombed at St. Joseph's Mausoleum in Newton, New Jersey. Vera lived another 23 years, dying in 2024 at the age of 100. Merriell Alessandro Shelton, everyone called him Snafu, was born in Louisiana in 1922, of Cajun and Native American descent. He spoke with such a thick Southern accent that even fellow Marines sometimes struggled to understand him. Before the war, he'd worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression. He enlisted in 1942 and was assigned to K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines as a mortarman. He got his nickname at Cape Gloucester. According to one account, Romas Bergen watched Shelton consistently cause small disasters through reckless behavior and said, "You know what you are, Shelton? You're just one big snafu looking for a place to happen." Snafu, situation normal, all fucked up. The name stuck. In the series, Rami Malek plays Snafu as something between a guardian angel and a demon. A man who'd seen too much, done too much, but still tried to protect Eugene Sledge's innocence. It's not far from the truth. Snafu gave Sledge his nickname, Sledgehammer. Decades after the war, Sledge's wife tried to wake him one morning by whispering "Sledgehammer" instead of shaking him. Sledge jumped up, heart pounding. That's how deep the war had embedded itself. But here's what the series doesn't tell you. After the war, Snafu returned to Louisiana and simply went silent. He married Gladys Bowman Shelton. They had 2 sons, Alan and Floyd. He worked as an air conditioner repairman and installer, then in the lumber industry. Neighbors remember him as a short, stocky man with a hard face who barely spoke, smoked filterless cigarettes, and loved to gamble. No one, not even his wife, knew what he'd done in the war. He didn't talk about it. Not to his family. Not to his neighbors. Not to anyone. For 35 years, Snafu had no contact with any of his fellow Marines. Then, in 1980, his son read Eugene Sledge's memoir with the old breed and saw his father's name throughout it. He asked, "Is this you, Dad?" That's when Snafu finally reached out. He and Sledge reunited at a Marine Corps veterans meeting in 1983. There's a photograph of them together, Snafu on the left, Paul Wright in the middle, Sledge on the right. 3 old men who'd survived hell together. When Merriell Snafu Shelton died on the 3rd of May, 1993, aged 71, Eugene Sledge was one of his pallbearers. Tragically, Snafu's eldest son Floyd, a talented teenage baseball player, had died before him in 1990 from drug addiction. His wife Gladys died in 1998. Snafu is buried at Bowman-Dedden Cemetery in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, alongside Gladys. We've covered the legend who died at dawn, the professor haunted by nightmares, the writer who refused to sanitize the truth, and the killer who went silent for 35 years. But we're not done yet. Coming up, the childhood friends who took wildly different paths after surviving hell together, the widow who never stopped loving her hero, and the train goodbye that lasted 35 years. Stay with me. Sidney Phillips and Eugene Sledge were childhood friends in Mobile, Alabama. They explored Mobile Bay together, hunted together, grew up a few blocks apart. When Phillips graduated from Murphy High School in June 1941, where his father was the headmaster, Sledge was still a year behind, held back by childhood illness. The day after Pearl Harbor, 17-year-old Phillips enlisted in the Marines. Sledge, still in high school and suffering from a heart murmur, had to wait. The series shows their goodbye the afternoon before Phillips ships out. Sledge disappointed they can't go together, Phillips telling his friend to take care of himself. Phillips served as an 81mm mortarman with H Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. He fought at Guadalcanal, where he turned 18 during the Battle of the Tenarue. He fought at Cape Gloucester. By the time Phillips returned to Pavuvu, Eugene Sledge had finally enlisted. The series captures their reunion beautifully. Phillips running to Sledge, playfully tussling with him, then later sitting on the beach talking. What it doesn't show is how much Phillips had changed. Sledge, fresh and innocent, still saw his childhood friend. Phillips, having survived Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester, had seen too much death. The conversation on the beach was awkward. Innocent's meeting experience. Phillips shipped out before Sledge could say goodbye. His final act in the series is visiting Sledge's parents back in Mobile, rather unconvincingly telling them he's not worried about their son. He was lying. He knew what was coming. Phillips's 4-year enlistment expired on the 31st of December, 1945. He returned to Mobile, enrolled in the V-12 program designed to educate young men to become Navy officers. But whilst at Cape Gloucester, he'd decided to become a physician. He enrolled in Spring Hill College, then medical school. In April 1946, he married Mary Victoria Houston, his childhood neighbor. His best man was Eugene Sledge. Phillips opened a family practice in Theodore, Alabama, near Mobile. For 40 years, he treated thousands of patients. His patients called him Mr. Wonderful, the caring doctor who always went the extra mile. They had no idea their gentle doctor still carried shrapnel wounds from Guadalcanal. Phillips and Sledge remained close friends for life. When Sledge published with The Old Breed, Phillips's family introduced him to Ken Burns's writing team for the documentary The War, then later to HBO's writers for The Pacific. Mary Houston Phillips died on the 19th of April 2000, aged 75. Sidney Phillips followed on the 26th of September 2015, aged 91. He left behind 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 22 great-grandchildren. He's buried at Pinecrest Cemetery in Mobile, the same cemetery where his best friend Eugene Sledge was laid to rest 14 years earlier. Let's return to Lena May Ridgey. She was born on the 7th of March 1913, in Portland, Oregon. By the time World War II arrived, she was in her late 20s, older than most of the young men shipping out. She joined the Marine Corps Women's Reserve and was assigned to Camp Pendleton, where she worked as a field cook whilst training Marines for combat. That's where she met John Basilone in 1944. He was the most famous Marine in America. She was a sergeant doing her duty. At first, she wasn't impressed. Everyone told her about his Medal of Honor, about him traveling with movie stars. Other women threw themselves at him. Lena's response? So what? That's what made Basilone fall in love with her. They married on the 10th of July, 1944. The reception was at the Carlsbad Hotel. They honeymooned at an onion farm near Portland, Oregon. Hardly glamorous, but Basilone wasn't a glamorous man despite his fame. 7 months later, he was dead. Lena learned she was a widow on her 32nd birthday, the 7th of March, 1945. The telegram read, "Deeply regret to inform you that your husband, Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, USMC, was killed in action February 19, 1945 at Iwo Jima." Here's what the Pacific doesn't show you. Lena May Basilone never remarried. She had 54 years after John's death. She remained in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve as long as she could. She volunteered countless hours to the Women's Marine Association, the American Veterans Auxiliary, and the Long Beach Veterans Hospital. On the 21st of December, 1945, 10 months after John's death, Lena christened the USS Basilone, a Gearing-class destroyer named in his honor. She stood there in a formal ceremony, breaking the champagne bottle against the hull of a ship that would carry her husband's name into the seas he'd died defending. She bought a home in Lakewood, California, and lived there for 50 years. She worked for the electric company. She attended veterans' gatherings when asked, but mostly she lived quietly. Before her death, the Veterans Administration offered to bury her at Arlington National Cemetery next to John. She declined. She didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. She chose Riverside National Cemetery in Riverside, California instead. Lena May Basilone died on the 11th of June, 1999, aged 86. When they buried her, she was still wearing her wedding ring, the ring John Basilone had placed on her finger 55 years earlier. Here's what needs to be said. Not all the Marines who survived the Pacific made it home whole. Eugene Sledge fought nightmares for 55 years. He taught biology brilliantly, loved his students, but Mozart and poetry could only do so much. The war never truly left him. Robert Leckie wrote brilliantly about the war, but spent his final years losing his memories to Alzheimer's, the very mind that had captured the Pacific so vividly slowly erased. Merriell Shelton returned home and barely spoke for 35 years. His eldest son died of drug addiction. Whatever Snafu saw, whatever he did, he locked it away so deep that even his own wife didn't know. Sidney Phillips became a beloved doctor, but he carried shrapnel wounds from Guadalcanal for the rest of his life. Physical reminders of battles fought 70 years earlier. And John Basilone never got the chance to come home at all. He insisted on returning to combat, survived Guadalcanal's hell, only to die on a beach at Iwo Jima at 10:30 in the morning. The Pacific shows you 10 episodes of combat. What it can't show you is the 50, 60, 70 years these men spent trying to process what they'd endured. The marriages that lasted. The nightmares that didn't stop. The friendships that endured. The silence that fell over so many of them. These men came home, but parts of them never did. Let me tell you one more story, one that captures everything about these men. In the final episode of The Pacific, Eugene Sledge boards a train heading home. Merriell Shelton gets on with him. They're both heading south, Sledge to Alabama, Snafu to Louisiana. The train rumbles through the night. Sledge, exhausted, falls asleep. When the train reaches Louisiana, Snafu's stop, he stands up. He looks at Sledge sleeping. You can see in his face that he wants to wake him, wants to say goodbye, wants to say something. But he doesn't. He walks off the train, holding his tongue. That's the last time they saw each other for 35 years. Think about that. Two men who'd survived Peleliu and Okinawa together, who'd watched friends die, who'd endured hell that no one else could understand, and they couldn't find the words to say goodbye. That's the real story of the Pacific. Not the heroism, though there was plenty of that. Not the combat, though it was brutal beyond imagination. The real story is what happened after. The silence that fell. The nightmares that persisted. The difficulty of putting horror into words. Eugene Sledge eventually found those words. He wrote with the old breed, and in doing so, gave voice to what so many couldn't say. When Snafu's son read that book and showed it to his father, something broke open. The silence ended. In 1983, at a 1st Marine Division reunion in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Sledge and Snafu sat together again. There's a photograph, Snafu on the left, Paul Wright in the middle, Sledge on the right. 3 old men, smiling. No longer the traumatized young Marines on that train. Just friends finally able to speak. 10 years later, when Snafu died in 1993, Sledge traveled to Louisiana to carry his friend's coffin. 8 years after that, in 2001, Sledge followed him. And 14 years after that, in 2015, Sidney Phillips completed the trio. They're all buried now. Sledge and Phillips in Mobile. Snafu in Louisiana. Leckie in New Jersey. Basilone at Arlington. The generation that fought the Pacific War is gone. But their stories remain, not the sanitized versions, not the Hollywood epilogues, but the real stories of men who survived hell and spent the rest of their lives trying to make sense of what they'd endured. What these stories reveal about war is this: survival isn't binary. You don't simply live or die. You survive in fragments. Some men, like Eugene Sledge, survived by transforming horror into words, by writing until the nightmares quieted, if only slightly. Some men, like Robert Leckie, survived by refusing to let others sanitize what they'd experienced. Some men, like Sidney Phillips, survived by serving others, by becoming the doctor who healed, even whilst carrying his own wounds. Some men, like Snafu Shelton, survived by going silent for decades, by locking it all away until a book gave him permission to speak. And some men, like John Basilone, didn't survive at all. But their widows did, carrying their love forward, wearing wedding rings for 55 years, honoring memories that never faded. The Pacific War ended in 1945. But for the men who fought it, the war continued, in nightmares, in silences, in moments when a wife whispered a nickname and her husband jumped up, heart-pounding, transported back to a foxhole on Okinawa. These men gave everything. Some gave their lives. Others gave their peace of mind. All of them gave their youth, their innocence, their ability to ever feel fully at home again. The least we can do is remember them properly. Not as characters in a series, but as men who survived hell and then spent decades trying to live with what they'd seen. They deserve that much. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. Videos like this take weeks to research and produce. Tracking down obituaries, reading memoirs, piecing together timelines from military records and family interviews. They only exist because people like you actually watch them all the way through. If you want more stories like this, stories that dig deeper than the series, deeper than the end credits, stories that honor the real men behind the characters, then subscribe. And if you really want to help these stories reach more people, share this video. Post it on your timeline. Send it to someone who cares about history. These stories deserve to be heard. These men gave everything. The least we can do is remember them properly. I'll see you in the next one.